I was but a boy when the Hern found us, sailing that massive ship down into the plains around our farm on angelic wings of blue energy. Why they chose to uplift us grown, I don't know. We hadn't even finished fully unifying our society yet, much less achieved our first space flight. In but a few years, we went from a fractured agrarian society to a mostly unified galactic backwater. And with their jobs done, the Hern packed up and left us to puzzle out how to progress. Grown society was still reeling, our culture still in shock. We had no idea what to do. The Hern were halfway across the galaxy from us. We could barely even contact them. We had gone from starting to learn about gravity and the forces of the universe to splitting atoms before I entered my second year of school. We weren't prepared for this. But then, another race came. Humans. Twice as big as us, and almost 4 times as heavy, they had settled the system next to us and sent a transport ship over to trade resources for excess food. I was just entering my 4th year of schooling then, but watching that ship blast through the skies above me with a gout of flame behind it made me realize what I wanted to be. I wanted to fly those ships. Sadly, I never got there, but I give thanks for that, because instead I got to witness the most pure and beautiful act I will ever see in my life. I had just graduated university as a communications officer and had gotten a job in the starport. With the traffic increase from humans buying our excess crops, there had been high demand in recent years for officers with experiences with human languages. I relished the chance to live and work as close to those who traveled the stars as I could, and did everything I had to convince my bosses to hire me. My days were filled with coordinating the swarm of traffic, trying desperately to ensure the impatient pilots didn't collide into one another. At nights, I would sit in the port bar and listen to old men tell stories of distant planets, even though I was convinced they were making half of it up to impress me. Humans dominated our ports, and when human leaders came to visit, they came both as dignitaries and, they said, as friends. Friends, such a nebulous concept. To some species, it just means someone you like. Others, it means someone you care for. The Grown thought of our friends as people you joke about with and spend time with when lonely, but humans tended to keep to their own kind. They filled our trade logs and bought every scrap of food they could from us, but never seemed to engage with us as we would with our own friends. But then the war came. We were far from the front, but it filled our screens and touched our lives. Captains long past their prime, who had only ever flown cargo ships, disappeared into the haze of politics and explosions that was the conflict, their stories lost to eternity. People I considered heroes vanished with naught but a one-line message saying they were off to ensure the war would end. I kept at my job, but the fervor and delight I once applied to it was lost as less and less ships came. First, just 1 or 2 regulars stopped coming, then a dozen, then 100, before finally they stopped altogether. It had been almost a month without a single ship when the fair Maiden limped into port. It was clear from its scorched and pitted hull and flickering shields that it had been in combat, but the crew and the captain were in high spirits. Even as small bits broke off their ship to become micro-debris, they hailed me requesting repairs and resupply, offering technology and medical supplies in return. As the only comms officer fluent in the humans' trade language, I was ordered to assist the engineering corps in talking to their crew. At first I was hesitant, but then I found out we would be going on to the ship itself and leapt at the opportunity. I sprinted from my desk to the transport ships, arriving even before the engineers and practically vibrating with excitement. For 5 hours we toured what I learned was called a cruiser. A ship the size of a city to us was in fact in only medium tier to the humans. She was long and thin, her bow angled like a spear and bristling all over with weapons. She was called an NP Aero-class ship, and everything about her was mysterious and beautiful. We got a quick tour of her weapons, storage bay, and engines, and it was there I was half convinced we were going to be thrown out. The engineer was going on about the properties of the warp drive, this colossal beast of a thing that was humming in the center of a room bigger than a city block. One of our people pointed to a switch shielded by protective glass, as it was one of the only things in the room the engineer hadn't spoke about. I dutifully asked him what it was for, and he shook his head. State secret was all I got in response, and no matter how much our people pushed him to answer them, it was the only explanation he would give. When it was clear we weren't going to let the point go that easily, he motioned for the guards to escort us away, and we were half shoved, half marched out of the engine room. The guards escorted us back to the little vehicle we were using to travel about and took us over to the command deck, the final section we were to see. It was beautiful, pure white, and busy with dozens of people all keeping track of so many tasks. My mind still boggles how half the information was understood. The captain sat in her chair in the middle of this whole mess, and we were brought forward to greet her as she stood up, smiling warmly at us. Captain Sarah T. Lucelle. That was all the words we got out of her before alarms blared at such volume I thought the world was ending. Barked orders and responses came so fast I couldn't translate fully, but I knew enough to know what had occurred. A Perrine dreadnought had dropped into real space only a few 100 kilometers away, its massive size dwarfing that of the human ship, obscuring even the planet behind it. Before I could ask what was going on, the men escorting us picked us up 2 at a time and bolted to vehicle, driving it madly to the landing bay we had arrived at. Humans ran all about as we were thrown into the transport vehicle and ordered to run. We didn't argue and just slammed the throttle to maximum as we heard the massive guns of the fair Maiden start firing. Behind us, other transports were sprinting away. Those many who had come to deliver supplies and fuel to the ship had barely got their cargo out before they were ordered to flee like us. I was sitting in the back when the hail came, the little transport sputtering back towards orbit so it could begin its descent. I was bellowed for and practically sprinted forward, worried and scared. Captain Lucelle was on the video call, her face creased with worry and fear. "I'm sorry, but those Pyrene bastards tracked us down. We thought we covered our tracks, but it seems they're better than we thought. We'll try our best, but we're sorry for any losses you sustain." I couldn't believe it. She was facing almost certain death, and she was worried about us? Some tiny forgotten one-world species that was likely considered nothing more than a bad joke to the galaxy? Suddenly, a shot from the dreadnought lanced past the shields of the cruiser, taking out one of the transports trailing us. Cries of alarm from those in the back who witnessed it made me freeze, and it was clear the captain had heard it as well. From the background of the video call, I could also hear cries of panic and horror, and over the next minute we saw the guns and missile pods fall silent as their ammo supplies ran empty. Whatever we had managed to bring, it wasn't enough. A man next to the captain placed a hand on her shoulder, and she turned to look at him as the background fell silent. Everyone we could see, likely everyone in the command deck also, had turned to stare at the woman leading them, even as the dreadnought's barrage ripped apart their shields. The captain stared at the man, her eyes gazing past him into infinity, and she nodded. A simple, short motion, as if she didn't want to expend any more energy than necessary on the motion. The man started bellowing in a language I didn't know. I caught bits and pieces that were close enough to the trade language, but nothing made sense. He was commanding some kind of attack, but they were out of ammo, weren't they? The captain addressed the call again, her face set and determined. I will remember what she said for the remainder of my life.
Young Grown, when we first came to your planet, your leaders signed a pact with us. It said we were not only trading partners, but friends. That pact formed the basis of our trade agreement, and the food you have provided ensured our colonies didn't starve when they most needed it. Humanity owes you a debt you cannot begin to understand. Dozens of colonies would have failed if not for your people. May this act of ours go some way of repaying our debt to you all. Engineering crew, flip the switch. It's time to ensure these people remain free. She paused, looking up from man she had called to and towards the dreadnought in the distance. As the scene behind here descended into a determined chaos, she sat still, twisting a golden ring around one of the fingers on her left hand. When she next spoke, it was almost a whisper, as if she had forgotten we were there. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there for the birth, my darling. I'm sorry I'll never get to see Katie. May she grow up in a time of peace."
The call was forcibly terminated, as the engines of the cruiser let out a gout of radioactive fire longer than the ship itself. The engine housing vaporized instantly, as all safety measures were abandoned, and the long, spear-like vessel burned towards the opposition at a speed I didn't know was possible. The dreadnought had evidently seen this strategy before, and as we watched helplessly, it turned the full force of its guns onto the speeding ship, desperately trying to stop what was coming. But it didn't matter one bit. From the moment that switch was thrown, their fate was sealed, and as missiles and slug throwers tore the ship apart, it flew through the intervening space and slammed into the dreadnought's hull. The spear-like bow did what it was designed to do, penetrating deep into the bigger ship, tearing as far into the internal structure as it could. It was like an arrow sticking out of a Trahel's side, and we watched in horror as we assumed that was all it had left to give, but we were foolish to assume it was over. As the dreadnought began turning its hull to face our capital, the fair Maiden detonated with the force of a sun and engulfed the Perrine ship in nuclear fire. Its payload shredded that ship to atoms. Nothing was left of either vessel but a few errant bits of slag burned beyond all recognition. 3 hours later, a fleet of human ships arrived. We hailed them, apologizing over and over for what happened, offering anything we could think of to stall what we were sure was going to be their rage at losing one of their own. Instead, the admiral of their group thanked us for bearing witness to the fair Maiden's sacrifice, calling it the act of true friends. On that day, we learned what a human's friendship meant. It means to assist and defend those you care about, to ensure their safety at any cost. Those the humans befriended were like blood to them, and they were willing to give blood to defend us all. 2,486 souls viewed the Grown as friends, and all gave their lives to ensure I can stand here today. Members of the Presidium, words will never suffice to explain the debt we owe you, the gratitude we feel. Though your colonies are no longer in need of our harvests, you never withdrew your friendship. For years we never understood what that meant, but now we do. Our tiny people were insignificant on the galactic stage, nothing more than a galactic backwater abandoned by those who uplifted us. You didn't have to befriend us. You could have given us one-sided trade deals or even simply taken what you wanted from us, but instead you treated us as equals. An empire as vast and wondrous as yours stood before a society that hadn't even properly conquered their own world, much less their system, and treated us as just like you. Standing before you now, on the 10th anniversary of the fair Maiden's sacrifice, I make this proclamation. You extended to us another offer, once more as equals, to join this vast alliance of yours made up of all those you have met and befriended over the centuries. We are humbled before your offer, and accept without hesitation. The Grown will join the human alliance, join this group of friends, and may our friendship last until universe itself collapses back into nothingness. Prime Minister Tarun Lakuda, speaking to members of the Presidium in Lucelle Park on the 24th of May, 2248, on their homeworld of Grawl. The video shows him standing in front of a statue of the fair Maiden. Underneath sits a simple bronze plaque with the names of all the crew members who sacrificed their lives to protect Grawl engraved upon it. The inscription underneath them reads, "For so long as eternity lasts, we will remember your sacrifice.